Long ago, there was a crew of fearless Vikings, driven by an insatiable desire to explore the unknown. In their cold lands, the prophecies of a golden kingdom hidden beyond the frozen seas were more than tales to inspire. They were a call to greatness. Imagine, then, the preparations for this endeavor: boats reinforced with oak wood, weapons sharpened like promises, and hearts beating with the expectation of finding the unattainable. This was not just a voyage, it was a search for something greater, something that would define their names forever. They set out not for riches, but for the glory of being remembered. As they advanced out to sea, the landscape became a frozen painting of endless, unsettling horizons. The Arctic winds roared like living creatures, testing each man's courage. But the real surprise came when the ocean, once calm and trustworthy, revealed its darkest secrets. Sea monsters, which until then had existed only in the chants of skalds, rose from the deep waters. They were beings of an impossible size, with luminous eyes that seemed to probe the souls of the crew. With each stroke of the oar, there was a whisper of something watching, something waiting. And, as if that were not enough, the winds began to carry voices, not of men, but of spirits that echoed ancient stories of betrayal and power. These murmurs were not only frightening, they seemed to contain clues to the right path. But who would have the courage to listen to such whispers and unravel their riddles? For every promised answer, there was a price to pay. And it was in that moment, faced with the unpredictable, that the Vikings realized that their journey would not only be a battle against monsters and nature, but also a fight against their own fears and ambitions. To the north of the known lands, where the winds cut the face like blades of ice and the steep mountains hid ancient secrets, there was a village called Skaldvik. Small but prosperous, it stood on the edge of a deep fjord, protected by mountains that seemed to touch the heavens. The inhabitants of this village were different from other peoples of the north. They lived not only by the strength of their arms and the weapons they wielded, but also by the stories they told. Skaldvik was a place where oral tradition was sacred, and each family had a duty to keep alive the memory of their ancestors through sagas, poems, and songs. It was a community where the forge created not only weapons, but also symbols of faith and power, such as amulets carved with ancient runes. Children grew up hearing stories of heroes who braved treacherous seas and legendary monsters, and for them, the impossible was nothing more than a challenge worthy of a Viking. The elders, known as the Word Keepers, maintained the tradition of gathering the village on the darkest nights of winter to recite prophecies and legends that resonated in the hearts of the young. On those nights, their eyes would shine at the sound of verses about promised lands, where gold shone like the sun and the winds blew riches beyond imagination. It was in this environment that Osmund was born, forged between the steel of swords and the heat of stories. From an early age, Osmund was a different boy. While other young men ran along the icy beaches or trained with axes and shields, he spent hours listening to the Word Keepers. His mother, Astrid, was a healer, wise in potions and the mysteries of runes, and his father, Bjorn, a renowned blacksmith. It was said that Bjorn's weapons never broke in battle, and many believed that this was the work of Thor's blessing. Osmund, however, inherited something unique from his parents: the robust body of a warrior and the sharp mind of a strategist. Even as a young man, he demonstrated an innate instinct for leadership, capable of uniting those around him in times of crisis. As a teenager, Osmund faced his first great loss. During a harsh winter, an epidemic swept through the village, taking with it his father and several other renowned warriors. Bjorn's death marked the beginning of a new phase in his life. He took charge of the forge, learning to transform metal into weapons that carried both strength and beauty. But it was one cold night, while examining his father's tools, that he found something that would change his destiny. A dagger with runes engraved on the blade, accompanied by an enigmatic message that spoke of a promised land. This artifact became the spark that would fuel his determination in the years to come. Over time, Osmond became a respected man in Skoldvik, known for his courage, but also for his empathy for the weak. He led expeditions to explore nearby lands, bringing back resources that ensured the village's survival during harsh winters. His strategic vision and negotiation skills created lasting alliances with other northern communities, but that was not enough for him. Osmond knew deep down that his destiny lay beyond the village's borders. He believed in the prophecies of a promised land, a place where his people could live without fear of the harsh weather and invasions that haunted the north. And it was this conviction that united the crew that would accompany him on the journey. Each member was an essential piece in this puzzle. There was Ragnhild, a warrior of unparalleled strength and scars that told stories of battles won. Eirik, a navigator who could interpret the starry sky as if it were a map. And Freydis, the skald whose voice mesmerized even the hardest of hearts. Osmond handpicked each of them, not only for their skills, but because he believed that together they could face any trial. The village of Skoldvik bade farewell to the crew with a ceremony that was both celebratory and melancholic. The people knew that while this journey promised glory, it was also fraught with unknown dangers. Osmond, as he departed, looked back only once, promising himself that he would return, not with material wealth, but with a new home for his people. And so the story of Osmond and his crew began to be written, not only in the icy waters they would face, but also in the hearts of those who hoped for a better future in Skoldvik. The vastness of the sea presented an unforgiving challenge, a seemingly endless landscape of mystery and promise. The Viking ship, sturdy and built to withstand the worst storms, glided over the icy waters like a beast in search of its prey. The crew, led by Osmond, was anxious and full of anticipation, but the tension was palpable. After weeks of sailing, the horizon seemed an endless line of blue and white, with no sign of land. Osmond, as a leader, knew that maintaining morale was as crucial as dealing with the physical threats that would arise. He spoke often to his crew about the promised land of prophecy, describing a paradise of abundant harvests, endless forests, and riches beyond imagination. His words were like a fire that warmed their hearts amidst the biting cold. The challenges began to arise even before they saw anything unusual. The first test came in the form of a brutal storm. Waves as high as walls rose, tossing the ship from side to side. The sound of the wind was deafening, and the icy water that fell like needles made the men struggle to maintain balance and control the ship. Osmond stood out, shouting commands that cut through the chaos like a sharp blade. "Hold the ropes! Hold the helm steady! The sea will not take us today." The strength of his leadership kept the men focused, and although some were nearly thrown overboard, they managed to overcome the fury of the waters. When the sky finally cleared, the crew celebrated, but Osmond knew that this was only the beginning. The sea held deeper and more dangerous secrets awaiting them. Then, a few days later, they had their first encounter with something truly out of the ordinary. The sea seemed too calm, and the silence was almost deafening. Suddenly, a colossal shadow passed beneath the vessel, making the wood creak as if something were trying to pull it down into the depths. "Something watches us," one of the sailors muttered, his gaze fixed on the water. Before they could react, a monstrous creature emerged, a kraken, according to the more superstitious, though no one could say for sure what it was. Huge tentacles surrounded the ship, and the smell of salt and rot filled the air. Osmond did not hesitate. He drew his sword and shouted for the men to arm themselves. "If the sea wants war, we will fight until it respects us." The confrontation was fierce, with spears and axes trying to fend off the tentacles that were crushing the vessel. After a long battle, in which many were injured and the ship suffered damage, the creature finally retreated, disappearing into the depths. Relief was immediate, but the fear of what else might arise remained. Exhausted and with the ship damaged, the crew needed to find dry land to repair the vessel and rest. Osmond's compass guided them to a small island, but covered in dense forests. It was an unlikely refuge, but they could not be selective. Once ashore, the group began working together, hunting and fishing to replenish their supplies. Osmond, however, noticed something strange about the island. There were no large animals, only the sound of the wind in the trees. As the men celebrated their success with a bonfire and roast meats, Osmond gathered them around. He told them again about the promised land, talking about how each hardship they faced was a test from the gods, a necessary step to reach paradise. His words, while inspiring, were accompanied by uncertain looks. Many believed his stories, but others began to question. Would this journey really lead them somewhere? Or were they destined to be lost in the icy waters forever? The next morning, as they prepared to leave, the crew found strange markings in the sand on the beach, circular patterns that looked like they had been made by something huge and crawling. Osmond ordered everyone to hurry. "We will not stay to find out what did this," he said, his eyes serious. So they set out, leaving the island behind but carrying with them the sense that something else was watching them. Osmond, however, held firm to his faith. He knew that the journey was more than just a search for land. It was a test of strength, courage, and destiny. Each challenge they faced seemed to reinforce this idea, preparing them for what was to come, an inevitable encounter with the world's oldest secrets. The ancients said that the kraken was not just a creature, but a manifestation of the ocean's own will, an entity that emerged from the unfathomable depths to remind men that the sea was not theirs. In Viking mythology, it was known as Hafgufa, a colossal monster that ruled the coldest, darkest waters. Its name, when whispered in ancient sagas, was accompanied by terrifying descriptions. Gigantic tentacles that could crush ships like twigs and eyes as deep as the ocean itself, capable of paralyzing anyone who looked into them. It was more than a predator. It was a primordial force, a guardian of maritime mysteries that no man should dare to unravel. Osmond had known these stories since he was a child, but he never imagined that he would face the myth himself. The skalds in his village sang that the kraken appeared when the balance of the sea was disturbed, as a punishment for those who dared to trespass on forbidden territory. Some believed it was a servant of Ran, the goddess of the deep, sent to capture the unwary and take them to the underwater realm of the dead. Others said it had no master, that it was a being as old as the world, born from primeval waters before the gods had even walked upon Midgard. These legends fueled the fear and respect of seafarers, who avoided the seas of the far north, where rumors said the kraken lurked silently, awaiting its next prey. The attack Osmond and his crew faced was a vivid example of the creature's brutality. When it emerged, the air seemed to change, carrying a salty, acrid smell that made the men gag. Its body, a mass of dark, moist flesh, glistened in the dim light of day, while its tentacles moved with astonishing speed, destroying oars and crushing the deck. But what was even more terrifying was the sound it made, a deep, guttural wail, like the screams of lost souls echoing across the ocean. Osmond realized that the kraken was not just an animal, it was a dark intelligence, driven by something more than hunger. After the attack, as the crew repaired the ship, the men discussed in silence what they had faced. One of the elders, named Eric, remembered an old saga that told of a captain who tried to negotiate with the kraken, offering gold and jewels in exchange for his ship. The monster, according to the story, showed no interest in material wealth, but retreated when it heard chants dedicated to Ran. Eric suggested that Osmond consider this for the future, should they encounter the creature again. Although the leader was not a man of superstition, he knew that in the face of such mysterious forces, all knowledge could be a weapon. The Kraken, although temporarily defeated, was not a vanquished enemy. The crew knew that this would not be the last time they would face the horrors of the sea. Osmond, with a heavy heart, felt that the creature symbolized more than physical danger. It was a warning, a test imposed by something greater. But what secrets did the Kraken hold? And why did it seem to attack only those who dared to sail into the unknown? These questions remained, like a shadow, as the ship sailed on. After the Kraken's attack, the wind changed. The calm waters of the beginning of the journey gave way to a rough and unpredictable sea, as if the ocean itself had stirred in response to the Vikings' daring. Osmond knew that this was only the beginning of something greater, a journey that would test not only the physical endurance of his crew, but their sanity. In the days that followed, the sea challenged them with ever more terrifying monsters, storms that arose without warning, and a growing tension among the men themselves. The promise of the distant land seemed ever more distant as the horizon grew ever more vast and empty. The crew, experienced as they were unprepared for what awaited them. In the first few nights after the attack, the sound of the wind howling through the sails seemed to echo like a warning. During the long watches, fear crept in slowly, like a thick fog that obscured clarity of thought. The smell of salt and sea wafted from their soaked clothes, and food began to run out faster than they had anticipated. Hunting was difficult, the sea not giving up its creatures easily. Osmond, in his calm leadership, tried to keep morale high, but he knew his men were at their limit. One dark morning, as the ship sailed through a narrow passage between razor-sharp rocks, a shadow formed beneath the water. At first, it was just a vibration in the hull's ropes, a slight tremor. But soon, the waters churned violently, and a creature of colossal proportions emerged from the darkness. It was a gigantic electric fish, with luminescent tentacles that seemed to dance in the dim light of dawn. Its jaws, forged from a blade of natural iron, snapped with a roar that made the men cower in fear. With one swift movement, the monster attacked, its tentacles gripping the ship with surprising strength. Osmond ordered the men to fight, but it was not an easy fight. The electric fish, with its electricity, made weapons flicker in unsure hands and caused painful shocks, making any attack a dangerous task. It was a hard-fought battle, and at times it seemed as if the ship would be destroyed by the creature's might. However, with great effort and courage, the crew managed to cut off one of the tentacles, forcing the monster to retreat, but not before leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. During the fight, one of the younger sailors, Leif, was seriously injured, and his loss left everyone shaken. Osmond, though always steadfast, realized that his leadership was being tested at every turn. Leif's death was a brutal reminder that the sea was unforgiving, and that often the greatest sacrifices came with little warning. But the greatest danger lay ahead, and Osmond felt it as a premonition. Over the next few days, the weather became unpredictable, with winds so strong that the ship's mainmast nearly gave way. But the worst part wasn't the weather. Something seemed to be following the crew, something invisible but palpable. The wind didn't just rustle the sails, it whispered among the men, a strange murmur, as if ancient voices were intertwining with the sound of the storm. What they didn't know was that, deep beneath the sea, an ancient entity was watching them. A creature from the deep, an entity linked to the spirits of the ancient Vikings, one that fed on fear and doubt. It was one of the many spirits that guarded the secrets of the Promised Land, and its presence became increasingly oppressive as the Vikings approached their destination. The internal tension among the crew also began to grow. Fear and fatigue made even the most loyal men question Osmond's leadership. Some began to whisper of the journey's end. Others were convinced that the promised land was merely a myth, an illusion created to keep the men going. Osmond, aware of the growing division, gathered his sailors together and spoke from the heart. He told them of his vision, of the land that awaited them, and of the greater purpose that guided them. He knew that if the voyage was to continue, he would have to renew the spirit of his crew. "It is not the sea that defines us," he said, "but what we do with it. Every wave, every storm, is a test of our courage. It is not the promised land that awaits us, but our ability to overcome the impossible." His voice echoed in the souls of the sailors, rekindling a flame of hope in their weary hearts. But the threat that awaited them was beyond any challenge that Osmond's leadership could overcome. As night fell, a thick darkness covered the sea, and the first signs of land began to reveal themselves. But what had seemed like a glimpse of salvation soon turned into a new ordeal. A thick mist, like a cloak of shadows, enveloped the ship. From deep within the darkness, vaguely human shapes began to emerge, floating above the waters, their faces pale and empty. The spirits of the ancient Vikings, those who had perished in the treacherous waters, were back, seeking souls to join them in the afterlife. Osmond knew that the spirits were not enemies to be defeated, but tests to be overcome. They were there to challenge the courage of the crew, to test the strength of their belief in what they were doing. It was then that Osmond, in a thoughtless gesture, leapt to the side of the ship and raised his sword towards the spirits. "I challenge you," he shouted, and his voice cut through the mist with an unearthly force. "Which is stronger, fear or faith?" The answer came not in words, but in a shock of light that illuminated the night sky. The fog began to dissipate, and the path opened up ahead, revealing the promised land. An island in the distance, with mountains that touched the sky, and forests that seemed to pulse with life. The journey was about to come to an end, but a new journey was beginning. The promised land lay before them, but what awaited them in this new territory, where ancient legends intertwined with unknown truths, no one knew. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, revealing a stunning landscape, Osmond and his crew fell silent. They were approaching the promised land, the island described in the ancient prophecies they had sought with such sacrifice. The waters were calm now, as if the sea itself, after its attempt to test them, recognized the end of their journey. As they neared the shore, the wind whistled softly, and the mist that had once haunted them now seemed to vanish in the growing light of the sun. The island was a place of wild and unspoiled beauty. Its contours were wild, with snow-capped mountains rising majestically, like imposing guardians of the gateway to the unknown. The vegetation was dense but uniquely lush, with tall, ancient trees that seemed to whisper stories of ancient times, when the gods walked the earth. The air was fresh and pure, and the smell of pine and wet earth was welcoming. What struck Osmond and his men most was the sense of power emanating from every inch of the island, as if the very soil itself were imbued with the magic of ages past. When the ship finally ran aground on the dark sand beach, the crew burst into shouts of victory and relief. Tears streamed down their sweaty faces, stiffened by the salt of the sea. The weight of weeks of storms, monsters, and doubts finally began to fade. They had conquered the impossible. Osmond, though also moved, maintained a solemn posture, looking out at the vast unknown that stretched out before him. He knew that the greatest challenge was yet to come, but this was a moment worth every sacrifice, every battle, every loss. The sailors disembarked, their feet touching land for the first time, and began to explore the island with renewed enthusiasm. What they found, however, was even more extraordinary than they had imagined. There were traces of an ancient civilization, but not just any civilization. As they delved deeper into the island, they discovered ruins, stones carved with mysterious runes that seemed to pulse with an almost palpable energy. These stones, scattered along the coast and through the forests, seemed to be part of a network of power that connected the island to other unknown lands. Osmond, in his wisdom, knew that this island was not just a refuge, but a hub of a much larger world, where ancient secrets still lay buried. In time, the crew established a makeshift settlement, building wooden huts and a small fortress to protect themselves from the elements and any threats the island might hold. The work was hard, but the sense of accomplishment and the warmth of community renewed everyone's spirit. Each man, once weary and disillusioned, now worked with renewed vigor, as if the land they had walked upon was the cradle of something great. Buildings began to take shape, and a small village flourished where before there had been only wilderness. In the heart of this settlement, Osmond built a great bonfire, and around it he and his men gathered to celebrate. The tension that had once threatened to divide the crew now transformed into a sense of brotherhood. Everyone knew they had achieved something greater than anyone could have imagined. They were no longer seeking a legend. They were creating a new story, one that would be remembered for generations. As the flame crackled, Osmond spoke to his crew. Here we begin something new. The promised land is not an end, but a beginning. Here we forge our destiny, together. The journey does not end with our arrival. It merely takes a new direction. His eyes shone with a wisdom gained from each day at sea, from each battle overcome. Now we must respect what the island offers us, but also understand that it holds its own mysteries. We must protect what we find and learn from the secrets it hides. Our destiny, as guardians of the frozen sea, begins now. The men, who had been exhausted a moment ago, were now renewed by the vision of a future that was unfolding before them. The promised land was more than a land of plenty. It was a fertile ground for new conquests, new stories, and a home for the Viking people that Osmond and his crew were creating. They were, unwittingly, touching the foundations of a new civilization. In the days that followed, they continued to explore, finding springs of crystal-clear water, rivers that wound through the island, and fertile lands for farming. Game was plentiful, and the wild animals seemed somehow different from the creatures familiar from the lands to the north. There was a peculiar energy in the air, a sense that the island was alive, pulsing with the rhythm of ancient prophecies. As the first colony was established, the nights were filled with feasts around the campfire. Skalds began to sing the new sagas, celebrating the crew's courage and victory over the icy sea. Osmond, with a heart full of gratitude and a glimmer of pride, retired to his solitary meditations. He knew that his mission was not yet complete. He had been chosen, guided by ancient wisdom, but now he was also a guardian of something much greater, the connection between the human world and the ancient powers that inhabited the island. Yet a sense of unease never completely left him. Though the land was rich and full of promise, he knew that not all of the island's secrets had been revealed. The icy sea, with its terrifying creatures and powerful spirits, still watched them, and what lay hidden deep within the island might be something beyond human comprehension. But for now, he and his crew were safe, celebrating what they had achieved. With a new home built and hope renewed, the story of the Guardians of the Frozen Sea came to an end, but their journey was far from over. The promised land had been found, and the fate of Osmond and his crew was now intertwined with the eternal power of the waters, the mythical creatures, and the mysteries that dwelled at the heart of the world. Did you like this story? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next epic sagas. The journey continues,